You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to episode 45 of Making Tracks. I'm your co-host Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man who is literally one of the wonders of the galaxy. Everybody wonders how he's got this far. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm completely taken aback by that very, very lovely introduction, and that reminds me I need to give you 20 quid for that one. Pleasure. At the end of the show.
Pleasure.
So I'm good. I'm great, in fact. Yeah, had a really busy weekend in the garden doing kind of lockdown kind of projects and stuff still. How about you? How's things?
Very good. Done a bit around the house similarly, and loads of other random bits and bobs. We've got lots of things to talk about in this episode. The first thing I want to ask you, though, because I'm so excited, there's other things I could say, but I want to ask you this question straight away, Mark. This weekend you went to see Empire Strikes Back, which, by the way, is the #1 movie in America this weekend. You went to see Empire on the big screen. How was it seeing it on the big screen again, especially given its 40th anniversary right now?
Do you know what? It was the best way to, I think, reopen the cinema chains. Yeah. Personally, me and the girlfriend went down to we went up to Milton Keynes, right. And we saw it at the Odeon there with the iSense. So it was their big IMAX screen with the Dolby Atmos audio setup. Yeah. So that was really good. And I mean, it looked great. It looked really good. It's funny because I think sometimes we take for granted watching Star Wars on smaller screens, be it on the TV or even like mobile phones and tablets, but actually seeing it on the big screen, it's just how you're meant to see it. It really is. Yeah. So I was really, really glad to see it. Obviously, the cinema was kind of in a social distance kind of setup, but that was quite nice because it just meant we had more space. We weren't kind of crammed in. If people are umming and ahhing about seeing it, I thoroughly recommend going and seeing it. If you want to, wear a face mask during the screening, and if not, we didn't have anybody directly in front of us or directly behind us, and we had space either side, so it's actually great. So if you can get in and get the nice central seats, then you're laughing. I think it's well worth it. The audio mix was funny because actually there was points in the mix that Karen, the other half, she was like, I thought there were people talking behind me, but actually it wasn't. It's just the audio mix. There's just bits and bobs that she hadn't quite heard or wasn't quite as prominent before. I mean, we've got like a fairly decent 5.1 surround sound setup at home, but still it's not quite the same. And with Dolby Atmos, with this 3D like audio positioning system, it's, well, what would they call it? It's object-based positioning. So it means that you don't necessarily just pan something left to right. You can put it into like Z space, so you can kind of position like the depth and the height as well as like, you know, its orientation left to right. So it sounded really good. Yeah. I was listening actually back to your archive the other day, and I was listening to the Evan Kirshner interview. He talks about like in the scene between Han and Leia when she's trying to fix a Falcon, and he's kind of talking about how like there's a piston or something that's just moving in the background.
Yeah, just up and down, yeah.
In and out, which is kind of like, he says it's to signify kind of like the sexual tension and like the fact this is kind of as close to a sex moment as possible. Well, I'd kind of like never paid any attention to it before, but I don't know if it's because I was listening to the Kirsch interview so recently, but this thing actually, it's not in the background, it's right in the foreground in some of these shots. It's kind of out of focus, but you see it clear as day, just in the corner, just going in and out and in and out. And I was just like, that's so funny. Nowadays, even with cinema screens are so big, you could put that in out of focus on a cinema screen 40 years ago and it'll look fine. But because it's so big, actually, it's like, oh, that's quite prominent now. That's quite funny.
It just proves that they were thinking about what they were doing there, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
And the great news, like we said at the top of this piece, was that Empire is now back to #1 in the States. I think it took about 175,000 on Friday. They're expecting it to be high 400, low 500, 500,000 for the weekend, which again, like I say, puts it at #1 for the first time since 1997 when the special editions came out. Of course, in the UK, we had Secret Cinema a few years ago, so it was back in the top 10 back then, but I don't think it got to number 1. But how cool in its 40th year for that film to get back to number 1?
It's great, isn't it? And I think actually that it's just testament just to how good a film that is as well. Not just a Star Wars film, but just any film, really. Yeah. I mean, obviously, if this was a standard year and we'd had the films that were meant to be coming out, it may still have made as much money, but, obviously it's not going to be as number 1. But I think that should be something that the execs at Disney and Lucasfilm should be quite happy about, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, they were very smart about releasing or re-releasing these films. I mean, I know a few weeks back, Jaws got back to number 1, which of course came out in 75, so it's 45th anniversary for that. They were talking about Back to the Future was up there, E.T. was up there. This week, number 2 film was Black Panther, number 3 film was Inside Out, so they've been very canny about the films they've re-released. Yeah,
I mean, it's a no-brainer. What with all the films, the films which were meant to be coming out have been postponed and delayed to either later in the year or even next year. It's a really simple way to get the cinemas back on their feet a little bit, I suppose, just because actually, I suppose, in some respects, yes, you're probably not going to attract necessarily the same amount of audience pool as you would do for a new release. Considering the current circumstances, it may not be a bad thing. It gives everybody, the cinema employees, as well as the cinema goers, a chance to kind of get a little bit more used to being in that enclosed environment again with people that they don't know. I think it's a smart move.
It's a very smart move. And speaking of smart moves, something else that happened for Fantha Tracks recently was that we got reviewed on Rocco Depot. Now, Rocco Depot, if you don't know, they do podcast reviews every week. Stephen over there does a bunch of reviews, probably 15, 20 podcasts each week. And last week we managed to, and I don't quite know how we got this many, but we had 8 of our episodes reviewed, one of which was stuck up at number 2 on their top 5 for the week. So just want to give a quick shout out to Rocco Depot. Thank you so much for all those reviews. We really, really appreciate it. And if you're listening to this and you haven't reviewed us on iTunes or Google Podcasts or anywhere you do reviews, please give us some reviews, because we did say last episode, if you do us a review, we will give you a shout out. And here's our first shout out. Alan Wills gave us a review on iTunes. Thank you very much, Alan. Here's your shout out. And we will, if you do us a review, give you a shout out. So get out there, write us a lovely 5-star review. If you enjoy what we're doing, give us a shout. Let us know, because you will get a call out on Making Tracks.
I'm Anthony Daniels, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
So we've got some breaking news that's literally just landed as we're recording this episode 45. Lucasfilm and Disney have announced that there's a new animated show coming our way in 2021, which still sounds like sci-fi date, called Star Wars The Bad Batch, based on the characters that we know from the Clone Wars and we saw in more detail in Season 7. Mr. Mulcaster, what do you reckon about that?
I didn't see that coming. That's a fact. I was going to swear then. I forgot we were recording. No, I didn't see that coming. That's really cool. We've only got the press release to go on, but the press release does say that it's set in a post-Clone War era, which is great. So I guess that's. I wonder if we're going to see that like immediately after the events of Revenge of the Sith, or are they going to kind of let the dust settle a little bit? I mean, they could go a number of different ways in this, and it's really fun because I really liked the Bad Batch episodes. I thought the crew were really cool. They've got some nice, strong personalities in there, so I think you can create some really fun adventures.
It doesn't say that D. Bradley Baker's doing the voices, but you've got to assume that he is, and that they just want to make a big fuss of it because obviously he's the voice of all the clones. It does mention also that Dave Filoni is involved as an executive producer, but you can't imagine that he won't have some sort of creative finger in the pie, even though he's probably focusing more on live action now. One thing that I'm curious about is the animation style, because Rebels was so different to Clone Wars, and then they come back to Clone Wars with an animation style that was almost identical to what we saw for the 6 seasons as it kind of naturally progressed. So another question really, what do you think? Do you think they'll go for something distinctly different and change it up and keep it fresh and different, or do you think they'll stick with that familiar Clone Wars style?
I think for something like this has probably got to have a fairly gritty kind of feel to it. So I would think they would probably go and keep it similar, if not the same as the Clone Wars. Just partly, I'm just thinking just from a financial perspective, they've got all the characters already drawn pretty much. They know what the aesthetic is. It might even be kind of like one reason why we got Season 7 in some respects, because they could go like, well, we've got these assets, we've got the pipeline up and running, let's just carry on with a new series. But this is a whole new series under the Disney umbrella, which is which is cool.
With the characters, obviously, we saw the Bad Batch as heroes of the Republic. Order 66 has happened. Presumably, Bad Batch are going to be heroes of the Empire now, or are they? I mean, they are genetically different, as they make that point. There's a difference with these guys. I mean, just looking at the press release that Lucasfilm put out, the series follows the elite and experimental clones of the Bad Batch, first introduced in the Clone Wars, as they find their way in a rapidly changing galaxy in the immediate aftermath of the Clone Wars. Members of Bad Batch, a unique squad of clones who vary genetically from their brothers in the clone army. So that might be a sort of an indicator to where they're taking this series. Maybe these guys are the 18. They're the guys that go off and do something different from your general Order 66 affected clones that couldn't do anything but follow the orders of the Emperor. What do you think? You think there is certainly potential for that, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, Clone Force 99, that just screams kind of A-Team to me, doesn't it? They should just call it Clone Force 99 and scrap a Bad Batch. Just call it Clone Force 99. That sounds like retro 70s, 80s A-Team kind of vibe. There's possibly a good chance that their chips malfunctioned, or maybe they didn't even necessarily get, those kind of chips just because they were rejects. Yeah, my take would be, that they could possibly be like an A-Team style crew who have, for whatever reason, maybe if episode 1 is actually when the Empire tries to bring the hammer down, and the Empire being the elitist organisation that they are, probably don't want anything out of cast. So what they'll probably do is they would probably turn and look at the Bad Batch and go, right, these guys have got to get whacked pretty early on.
Yeah.
Maybe that's that first episode. They turn on their handlers, as it were, and they're forced to flee into the wider galaxy, and from there they could do lots of good or lots of damage to the Empire.
They could. I mean, the next line in that paragraph, it says, each possesses a singular exceptional skill, which we saw in Season 7 specifically, which makes them extraordinarily effective soldiers and a formidable crew. In the post-Clone Wars era, they will take on daring mercenary missions. So that kind of says that they're going off on their own, doesn't it? Daring mercenary missions as they struggle to stay afloat and find new purpose. So I think reading further in, it probably does follow what you're saying, that either the Empire ditched them or they didn't have a chip and they decide to leave. It feels like they've got their own missions going on there from that paragraph, doesn't it? Rather than telling a story within the Empire, it's them outside of it.
In 1972, a crack commander unit was sent to a prison by the military court for a crime they didn't commit. These men promptly escaped from a maximum security stockade to the Los Angeles underground. Today, they're still wanted by the government. They serve as soldiers of fortune. If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire Clone Force 99.
It feels like that. I mean, on the face of it, you think, well, what sort of story do they want to tell? But again, that paragraph there, really, if you look into it, mercenary, I mean, they're going to go out on their own, aren't they? They're going to have their own adventures and stuff. And also, given that it's post-Order 66, they're going to be coming across a lot of their clone brothers, even though these guys always felt very separate anyway, didn't they? Their own separate thing. It's going to be a fascinating time to tell stories, because we've told stories. I mean, Rogue One was sort of minutes before Star Wars. Solo was 10 years before, and there's Imperial elements in that. Rebels was 5 years before. So they were always a lot closer to A New Hope than Revenge of the Sith. This is closer to the Clone Wars, for example, than The Mandalorian is to the Battle of Endor. So, you're really coming off the back of the major conflict, really, isn't it, in the Clone Wars? So this really could be something special.
This is kind of proto-Empire era, isn't it? And you've got the potential there to maybe tie up some loose ends as to where some of these other clones that we've met in the Clone Wars have ended up. Yeah. And again, obviously, it's fertile ground for Rex and Ahsoka. Personally, for once being kind of greedy and selfish, I quite like this to definitely be a little bit more mature in its vibe than Resistance and Rebels. But even maybe the last season of Clone Wars, I think if you're going to double down on it. And I mean, we don't need like gratuitous violence, but I think we could actually have an engaging and mature animated series that really kind of gets into the crux of morality about loads of different topics. And I suppose this is a great way of expanding the universe in a very kind of like simple way, a bit like we did with The Mandalorian with like chapters 4, where you go to like a planet and it's that whole kind of planet of a week kind of scenario, and you help the locals out or something like that. It's good and it's engaging, and as long as the actual kind of the dynamics are there between the different members of the Force, then I think this could run and run and run.
It could, and I think because the Clone Wars Season 7 went down so well, this feels like Disney have listened and Lucasfilm have listened, and like people love the Clone Wars. But the Clone Wars, again, it was a 3-year time period between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. You can't keep telling Clone Wars stories, but you can tell stories with the characters of the Clone Wars, because so many of them did get beyond Order 66, Jedi Purge era, and survive. Not so many Jedi, of course, but certainly plenty of clones. And then you get into that era of bounty hunters are going to prosper. The Empire is completely on a monster building session, chomping through the galaxy, which takes time, which was always, to me, a failing of the sequel trilogy, was that you never got a sense of the First Order taking the galaxy. It just felt like it was done. Whereas with the Empire, you kind of felt like it was a big chain kind of being reeled, like reeling the chain in on an anchor, like slowly, inexorably working their way across the galaxy, taking planet by planet, and looking at the way that they did it. And this could be interesting because these guys have got the inside track on how they think, because the Empire grew out of the ashes of the Republic. It didn't just replace it or supersede it or whatever. It was it and became something else. So I think to follow these guys could be really, really fascinating. And I'm really pleased that Filoni's involved. I know I mentioned that earlier, but it does say, we are thrilled to bring Dave Filoni's vision to life through the next adventures of the Bad Batch. So clearly he had some sort of thought process about this.
I guess if he originated the characters originally, then yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, the production cast, you've got Athena Portillo as well, who did Clone Wars and Rebels, Brad Rue, who's done Star Wars Rebels and Resistance, as well as Jennifer Corbett, who's done Resistance and one of my favourite series of all time, NCIS. Plus Carrie Beck. Yeah. So the pedigree is good with this. I mean, yeah, like you said, they've not announced any cast, but then let's be fair, this is the initial press release, so they've got plenty more time to kind of release that over the next coming, weeks and months.
They do.
But what do you reckon? Do you reckon this was in production before we got Clone Wars Season 7? Or do you reckon this was like Clone Wars Season 7 was a test bed for a series like this?
It's a good question. I mean, there's been rumours online, as there always are, because it's Star Wars, and Star Wars is built on rumours, basically. But there's been rumours online of a Clone Wars type series in development for a long time. I've spoken to a few people who've said there's plenty more animation coming. So it doesn't surprise me. When this dropped earlier on today and I read it, I wasn't like, wow. I was like, oh, cool, because it kind of felt like it was something that was coming. That being said, they're saying it's coming out in 2021, so you got to figure it's sometime. I mean, they don't really even say, do they? Unless I missed it. Let me just check the press. No, it just says 2021. Will premiere on the streaming service 2021, so it's next year. So I don't know. I would imagine it's been in the works for a while, because, I mean, another question, Clone Wars was always sort of 15, 16 episodes a season, wasn't it? And season 7 of the Clone Wars was what, 10 episodes, was it? Was it 10?
10 or 12.
I think it was 10 or 12. So, and that feels like a streaming service kind of length for a series. So maybe they don't need to do as many episodes. Reason being, they've got their own platform now on Disney Plus. So if they spend 3 months showing you season 1 of Bad Batch, give it 6 weeks for us all to cool off a little bit, and then they'll launch season 3 of Mandalorian, and then give it a little break, and then it'll be season 1 of the Rebels spin-off that everyone keeps talking about with with Ezra and Sabine and all that lot. So you know what I mean. So you kind of wonder, they can kind of do a cyclical. And of course, we've got Kenobi coming, we've got Cassian coming. You can cycle these shows.
Hello, I'm Warwick Davis, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
As often as we possibly can on Making Tracks, we do tackle a listener's question, and we've gone through all sorts of stuff over the last few episodes. But this question, I've got to say, is one of the most unique ones we've ever got, And I'm going to read it out. It's from Paul Meredith in Halifax in West Yorkshire. And his question is this. I'm very concerned about George, he means George Lucas, George's income stream. He sold Lucasfilm to Disney for $4 billion and hastily announced that he would donate all of that money to charitable causes. Now that Disney is getting all of the profits from the movies and merchandise sales, how is George getting by on just his state pension? How can he fund the construction of a museum for that, for crying out loud? I recently saw a photo of George wearing a flannel shirt and a pair of jeans, so he's clearly struggling financially. Should I organise, this is the big question, should I organise a fundraising webpage to assist Mr. Lucas and his time of need? And that's from Paul Meredith in Halifax, West Yorkshire. Mark, do we need to help George Lucas?
Absolutely. Yeah, poor old George. I mean, no one should be wearing flannel this day and age. He's got a young family. He's got a young child, and he's got a wife to support. But for what I've heard, he doesn't tend to sign too many autographs, and when he does, he doesn't charge. I mean, for people who get signed stuff, stick them on eBay, but he doesn't get any money back. And we're back to our earlier story. I went to see The Empire Strikes Back on the weekend. I bet he doesn't see $1 of it anymore. So yeah, bless him. We should do like some kind of GoFundMe or something. Maybe what he needs to do, he maybe needs to take a leaf out of like Major Tom's idea, and maybe he should start doing laps of Skywalker Ranch, and then we should get like a donation page up for that. If he does like 100 laps of Skywalker Ranch, we'll see if we can raise a few million for him.
I never give it. I always assume that George, when he retired and sort of went off to, was it Chicago? He lives with his wife and just settled down. I thought, well, he's going to be okay in his dotage. He'll be fine. He'll be making his little films and just giving a bit of advice here, there, and everywhere. But until Paul sent that question in, I'd never really considered. I'd never put the pieces together. Like you say, the plaid shirts and the jeans. I mean, that's a bit Primani, isn't it? And so I get that. And yeah, he did. I mean, he gave a lot of money away, and I don't see, his name's up on the screen, but I think he sold his name, didn't he? He probably even sold his likeness. So I bet he has to pay Disney $1 when he looks in the mirror. So he's probably really in financial stress. I love your idea of doing walks around Skywalker Ranch. It's quite big. Do you think, would they even let him on the grounds anymore? I mean, I think he might struggle with that. Yeah. Yeah,
it might have to be like
10 laps of Imagination Park or something.
Yeah, or like 10 laps of the Lucas like museum. Once it's kind of finished and stuff.
That's huge.
Yeah. Maybe I'm being a bit tough on him. But then again, I don't know. He must have like put a few carded action figures to one side, don't you think?
You'd think. I'm kind of surprised.
He must have a lock-up somewhere.
He must be more disappointed that London Film and Comic Con was cancelled this year than anybody at Showmasters, because I would imagine he would have had a table in the car park selling signatures and action figures. That would have been his thing.
Yeah, totally. And of course, if he's broke, he won't be able to afford the pitch. So, it'd have to be out in the car park. I think we need to do something, and we should do something quick.
Listeners, if you've got any thoughts and ideas, how can we help George Lucas? He's clearly struggling financially. He needs some help. So send in your ideas, news@fanthatracks.com, and we'll do what we can for George. George, we love you. We want to help you. We don't quite know how.
Hi, this is Gareth Edwards, director of the best standalone Star Wars film since Caravan of Courage, called Rogue One. You're listening to Fantha Tracks. Enjoy.
Currently on Fantha Tracks, we're running a competition to win a Baby Yoda Scentsy Buddy. Now, if you've not seen one of these, there will be a little video on the site and on our social media, and also the competition page on the website. It is basically a Baby Yoda plush doll, very much looking like he does in the show, but with the Scentsy products, you actually put this little perfumed, like a sack inside, like a Build-A-Bear sort of thing, and you put it in and it smells amazing, and it does smell amazing. We've got one to win on the site this week. If you're UK based, you can enter, so get your answers in, head to the page, get your answers in, and if you picked and chosen from the people that enter, you will be winning a Baby Yoda Scentsy Buddy. So get in there now and good luck.
Hi, I'm Toby Jetson and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
What does Baby Yoda smell like?
Baby Yoda, it's got its own sort of Mandalorian smell, which is very tangy and sort of orangey, citrusy. It's not what you did. I expected wet biscuit, but it was actually quite nice. I was sniffing this baby in a really un-Mandalorian way, but yeah, it's actually a really nice smell. So the Scentsy stuff's really cool. We've talked about it on the site before, and their stuff is really nice. So it's a good licensee, because this thing it's proper size, and smells. I would want to rescue Baby Yoda if he actually smelt like that. I don't know about the cuteness and the look of him. I would just sniff the thing. But you know, it's like when you sniff babies' heads, because babies' heads smell really nice. Baby Yoda smells like that. But you've got to be in it to win it, so enter the competition.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
Back in May, we were involved in Farthest From 22 Live, and this August 2nd, Sunday, August the 2nd, we're involved in the next live event from Farthest From called Empire 40, which, believe it or not, celebrates the 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. Now, you and me did a live or a short episode of Making Tracks for Farthest From 22. We're doing that again for Empire 40, but there's loads of other stuff happening. We can't talk about it too much, but we can allude to it. So, Mark, allude to the audience what sort of stuff they're going to be seeing and hearing at Empire 40.
I think there's going to definitely be some cast and crew interviews that might be dropping, as well as some kind of product reviews. Some nice messages from the Star Wars community wide and far. So it's definitely something to check out. Go to the Facebook page and like it so when you get updates. And I think it's going to be great fun. The last one was, I enjoyed both us participating in it and also just watching it, and you know, just seeing people's comments and stuff like that. It's a really good fun event.
If you didn't watch Farthest From 22 live, you've got plenty of time. It's still a few weeks away, so go back and watch that first. The three separate live streams for that was really good fun, and there's some great interviews in there, so go back and watch that. And conversely, on that show we interviewed Anthony Daniels and Brian Herring, which we also played out on Making Tracks, so you can listen to those here on Making Tracks. But yeah, we've got some really cool stuff coming. There's quizzes, there's show and tells, like you say. There's messages from fandom and from cast and crew, interviews, vintage interviews, some which you may have heard before, others you certainly won't have done. There's one interview with somebody who's no longer with us, sadly, that's not been seen before. But we will have on the show very soon, hopefully next episode, Dave and Simon, who are the showrunners for Empire 40. So we will grab them by the scruff of the neck and make sure they're on Zoom or on Skype or something, and we'll speak to them next episode, and they can tell us all the stuff that we're not allowed to talk about.
I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you are following Fantha Tracks.
Julian Glover, he's been a guest on Making Tracks and Fantha Tracks a few times. I've interviewed him recently for Star Wars Insider. He's a fascinating guy who's got loads of stories and a career as long as your arm. He's been in, obviously, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Harry Potter, James Bond, Doctor Who. He's done it all. He's been in and seen everything. Game of Thrones, I mean, good grief. So he has, during lockdown, gone through all of his stuff and made the decision to auction a whole load of it off. And actually what ended up being just I think an initially small haul of stuff has turned into 260 items that are going to be put up in auction on the 24th of July by East Bristol Auctions in Bristol, believe it or not. And in there are some absolutely incredible items. We put a piece on the site about it. I will put my hands up and say I actually bid on a couple of things, but I got outbid really, really quickly. But the thing that probably grabs people's interest the most, two things, is his script for Last Crusade, which will not go cheaply. But for Star Wars fans, the most interesting by far is his Imperial Command badge from General Veers when he played him in Empire Strikes Back. Mark, have you had a little look through what's out there?
Yeah, I've had a little look. I would love to get something like the rank badge. That would be awesome. Yeah. And also, actually, I know many a 501st officer who would literally bend over backwards and, well, I know, sell their mum down the river probably for that. Because actually then they could wear it.
Yeah.
You know, which is basically one of the coolest things. If you could actually get something like this and not just keep it in a glass display cabinet, but actually wear it at troops and events, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
It's his costumes and bits and bobs he wore when he was Walter Donovan from Indiana Jones. Yeah. So, you know, his watch and stuff. But yeah, the script would be interesting. I always like looking at scripts.
I mean, this was fascinating because one of the things, I mean, is all his patches and his badges, loads of different things like autograph stuff, and not just him, but other actors as well. There's a Carrie Fisher autograph in there. There's Peter Mayhew autograph. There's all sorts of stuff that he's sort of collated over the years. But it reminded me, and he actually says it in the piece, that he threw loads of stuff away over the years because he thought nothing of it. And the one piece I do remember him telling me about when we did the interview was that he had the melted head from Last Crusade. That he had in his garage for years, and his wife was like, "Oh, really? You're keeping this?" And he was like, "No," and he binned it. And then he spoke to a collector years later, and the guy said, that's probably worth $50,000. And he just chucked it in the bin, So I think he learnt from then, don't throw anything away. But I think all the stuff that he didn't, not everything, but the stuff that he didn't throw away, I think he's probably going into this auction. One thing I did bid on, I will tell you what I bid on, his 501st, I think it was Alpine Garrison shirt, which I thought was just really cool. I thought I'd just like to have that. Probably wouldn't have, but it definitely wouldn't have fit me. Definitely wouldn't have fit me. Not this side of a massive, massive, massive diet, but still, it would have been cool. So yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that because the auction's on the 24th, which is only a couple of weeks away. So we'll certainly talk about it on the site, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on here. But yeah, head to the site, have a look at the article, looking at Julian Glover's auction items, and see if there's anything there that you want to purchase yourself.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So on Friday, you posted a nice little article that The Mandalorian has been nominated in the Television Critics Association Awards for Outstanding New Programme. This is hopefully going to be some kind of precursor, do you think, to the other award ceremonies hopefully running later in the year for like the Emmys and stuff like that?
Yeah. Star Wars has been completely ripped off at the Oscars for the last 30-odd years. Phantom Menace didn't win any nominations, but no wins. And, there's not been a win since Return of the Jedi, which I think we've had 8 films since Jedi. 9 if you count the Clone Wars. They've been completely ripped off. So on television, I mean, David Tennant won a daytime Emmy for his role in the Clone Wars. And I think Rebels won... I think there were Saturn Awards and stuff like that. But,
yeah,
in the big, especially the Golden Globes and the Emmys and stuff like that, the sort of comparable to the Oscars for television, yeah, it would be really cool because we've talked about Mandalorian a lot on the site, and you and me have talked about it a lot on Making Tracks. We all love it, but the technology side of it is where people really sort of point a finger and go, that is next level stuff, that's groundbreaking stuff. That's not why this has been nominated. It's been nominated in the Outstanding New category. It's an Outstanding New TV show. And like I say, if you look at who it's up against, The Morning Show, the Jennifer Aniston thing on Apple TV, Watchmen on HBO. There's some really good Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, which I think we get on Channel 4 over here, I think. So there's, there's some really good stuff that it's up against. I wouldn't bet against it. We're biased though, aren't we?
Yeah, we probably are. But I mean, it's nice to actually see just a nice mix of streaming and what we call like cable terrestrial
network shows. Yeah,
network shows. That's a better term for it. Yeah, network shows. So it's nice to see a nice mix between those two. I started watching the first episode of Watchmen, but didn't really get into it, and it's kind of drifted off. But I mean, you can still get it, and you can still download it on Sky, I believe. So I might give that one another go because it's got to be fairly tough competition, I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like very much kind of like a genre sci-fi comic book show, isn't it? So it will be interesting to see, how the Mandalorian does, because like you said, the animated shows did pick up a few awards, but live action, it's been very kind of like
slim pickings, isn't it? Yeah,
slim pickings. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Empire Strikes Back. I think Paul Hirsch picked up Best Film Editor. He got a Saturn Award for that. But yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not been a huge amount of kind of accolades really, which is kind of bizarre when you consider the cultural and also the actual impact Star Wars as a franchise has had on the industry as well. So it's well overdue.
It is, and we look at it from from the VFX side of it a lot because it's so interesting to us, and what you see on the screen is made by those visual effects. And you think Star Wars completely wiped the landscape clean and started again with visual effects techniques and just upped the game for Empire and really upped it for Jedi, and all three of those won Best Visual Effects anyway. And then you get to Phantom Menace, which digital backlot, CG lead characters, all that stuff, again, start from scratch. They've took what they did in Jurassic and Terminator 2 and Abyss and just moved it forward, and just reinvented that sort of genre of effects again, mixing models with CG and all the stuff they did in Phantom. Get a nomination, don't get a win. The Matrix wins, which is an amazing film, but it basically
fair enough, isn't it?
But it basically won for bullet time. Who the hell sees or uses bullet time anymore? That was such a 1990s visual effect. It's not even funny.
It's a bit passé, yeah.
Completely. Brilliantly done, don't get me wrong, but just who cares compared to what you saw in Phantom, which still holds up today. And now you come forward to The Mandalorian, and this is being nominated for the programme, but you think with the visual effects, when the visual effects awards start coming around, is Mando going to get gypped again because it's a Star Wars film? It just seems to be, it's almost like us in Eurovision. Britain will never win the Eurovision again. We just won't. We'll always come last. And it's like, are ILM ever going to get another Oscar? You know, we had Hal Hickel on recently, and he was the last guy from ILM to win a visual effects Oscar. Now, Rango won Best Animated Film, if I'm correct, I think in 2010. But Dead Man's Chest was the last ILM film to win a visual effects Oscar. You think what's come out since then for ILM? It's just, there's something political going on there, and I hope Mando doesn't get caught up in that with these awards.
You'd expect, I think, more than anything, for them to be nominated for the technical awards, and also I think for the soundtrack. The soundtrack's definitely got to be one of
at the Grammys.
The strongest. Yeah, at the Grammys especially. Yeah. So fingers crossed. Let's see what happens, I guess.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll stay across this one, but I'm not sure when the awards are handed out. It doesn't say in the article, but we'll be sure to post that on the site. And if there's any wins, then you'll hear clinking glasses on Making Tracks.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Our friends over at Blues Harvest, who, if you've been to Celebration Europe or across to Celebration Chicago, you'll have seen them at the 501st Bashes. They have released their new live album called Made in Space. We were lucky enough to debut the opening track, the Star Wars live track, on Fantha Tracks last week. Greg and Carl are going to be speaking to them very soon on Desert Planet Disc. A couple of episodes coming up there. Have you heard anything yet, Mark, from the album?
I have heard Made in Space live, and it sounds absolutely freaking awesome. It is like a collection of live tracks recorded live, which is always fun. There's just like a really strong set list of theme music and stuff like that, which just, the way these guys orchestrate and arrange for tracks is just incredible. As a bassist, I'm really envious about them. It'd be a band I'd love to join if I was given the opportunity. Yeah. I think they're totally awesome, and they're amazing at what they do. So download it. You can listen to the album without having to pay for anything through Spotify. You may get an ad here or there, but it's well worth it. Just definitely check it out.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll read out the track listing. Star Wars, which is the opening track which we debuted on Fantha Tracks last week. Death Star, Tatooine Sunset, Chewbacca, which is their version of Rosanna, Doctor Who, The Avengers, which is awesome, by the way, Immigrant Song, who doesn't love that, Cantina Band, Hooked on a Feeling, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mr. Blue Sky, which I've heard them do live a couple of times, Footloose, Ghostbusters, and The Power of Love. So they don't just do Star Wars, they do a mixture of stuff. They've played gigs all over the place. They've played Sci-Fi Weekend, they've played at Disneyland Paris, the Celebration we just mentioned, Star Wars Fan Fun Day they've played at Capital Sci-Fi. So they've really got around. They've been around for a few years. If you've ever seen their live set at part of Cantina, which of course our guest on last episode, Martin Keeler, was in charge of and pulling that together, they had David Collins get up on stage with them for that as well. So they were absolutely fantastic. Yeah, we are going to play out this episode with that first track, Star Wars. But before then, thanks for listening to episode 45 of Making Tracks. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Now, you heard we read out another listener's question today. We want to help George Lucas. Send in your answers. You can comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review. Please, 5 stars are better on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. We're going to play out with Blues Harvest playing Star Wars, but before then, Mark, thank you for being my co-host on this episode. It's been wonderful.
It's been fun, hasn't it?
It has.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
Who said Baby Yoda?